flow of information and a closer inspection of the political philosophy of the American left. So why is flow of information relevant to our discussions? Well, it's essentially the only way that governments have to control people. Now, in the old models, information could simply be dammed up and you could prevent it from reaching people. So if you look at the Soviet Union, for example, during its heyday, let's say the 1950s or 60s into the 70s even, they were able to successfully stop information from ever reaching the public because they didn't have a massive infrastructure to support all kinds of digital information and wireless broadcast, and we just didn't have these things during that time. So it was easy for them to remain in control all the time. North Korea looks like that today. So it's a closed society. Virtually no information from the outside world trickles in, and almost none trickles out. There exists no infrastructure to support mass transmission of information, and so it's very, very limited, and for that reason it makes an excellent model if you want to see the old style, where you were able to seize control of information and then just dam it up when you didn't want it to reach people. Of course, in Western countries, primarily the United States, we don't have that luxury when we want to control people. For the better part of 100 years, we have had a massive infrastructure here that has made it virtually impossible for the government to seize control of information and prevent it from moving in the way that perhaps the Soviets or the North Koreans can do today. And if you want to validate this claim, you really need look no further than 1947 Roswell, New Mexico, where the United States Army may or may not have recovered debris from a crashed UFO. But the point is, once the announcement was made on a local radio station, that was it. There was no controlling that message. It went wild, and within hours and days, the entire country was buzzing about it, wondering what had happened there. The Army had gone back and tried to change the message and say, no, it was actually a weather balloon, but it was far too late, and they had lost control of the narrative. And perhaps one of the greatest lessons of the Cold War was learned on that day. And that is that if you're going to control information in a 21st century Western democracy, then you're not going to be able to start and stop the flow. You must manipulate it. So when you can't stop the water, you better be able to put a rudder into it and then manipulate the current one way or the other. That's the best that you can hope for. And so this, I think it's safe to say, the American left has realized for a very long time. They have full spectrum dominance, as the military likes to say, of most of the communication apparatus in the country. They're largely in control of Hollywood and the mass media, certainly the news, education. And so once you begin to dominate areas like that, it's very, very difficult for anyone else to get a message out without you stomping all over it. They're really in charge up until very recently with Elon Musk purchasing Twitter, if that does become a reality. They had enjoyed control of that narrative as well in that digital playground that doesn't really exist. So that in mind, I want to take a look at the political philosophy of the American left. So thinking about that flow of information and why it's so important for them to be able to have full spectrum dominance over that communication. Now, if I had to state a thumbnail of the American left's current political philosophy, it would sound something like this. Basically, society is broken, corrupt, irredeemable, and therefore the government is needed to come in and play race and gender referees and in order to address social ills. And this is a very hands-on kind of a social engineering top-down approach. And part of the reason that they do this is it's a lot easier than actually governing. It's part of the reason that the universities have become so corrupted in the way that they have, is because it's a lot easier to go into work and just swear allegiance to diversity, equity, inclusion than it is to produce papers and do research and have debates with people and try to assert your ideas. It's far easier to just go in and cave in to the DIE agenda. So we see a lot of that, and I wanted to point that out, that it's easier for government to do that, to play this game with people, where we have to come in and police everyone on phony premises. And I want to talk about those two phony premises right now, because their political philosophy is undergirded by these two premises. Number one, permanent racism exists. And who is to blame? People who are white. And please note that one feature of this is that white people are irredeemably racist. They will always be racist. So if someone isn't standing there watching them, policing, having programs in place to ensure that they're not going to roll all over a smaller population of minorities, if you didn't have that apparatus in place, then we would just dissolve into 1951 style Jim Crow over a weekend. That's basically the premise, and that's obviously not true. This idea of settling the historical score. And this is largely based on campus feminism, this idea that everything is relevant to the subjective and the individual, and I can produce these auto-ethnograph style PhDs where it's basically a few pages out of my personal diary, but who are you to challenge my experiences? And so it gets a rubber stamp validation, and then I show up on the door with a PhD wanting to teach a class at your college, and you don't know the difference between a regular bona fide PhD with academic integrity versus this postmodern piece of garbage that's essentially a piece of someone's diary that's been validated. So premise number two that is false would be that there is permanent misogyny in the United States. And of course, this is the fault of men. Now, how unlucky are you if you happen to have white skin and be permanently racist according to the left? But now if you're also a man, you're permanently misogynistic. So that's a real intersection for them there. It's their word. I couldn't resist but to get that in there. Now, is there permanent misogyny in our society? No. Women would not be crushing men across almost every metric today. They're earning more bachelor's degrees. They're earning more master's degrees. They're living longer. They're starting out of college making more money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so the idea being, just in the case of permanent racism, is that if we weren't there to police men, if we weren't there to watch like hawks and prevent them, then that over a weekend we would go right back to the way that things used to be, which I'm not sure that they ever were, but this is the notion that's been instilled by Hollywood, where men treated women as property, and they essentially would chain them to the stove and insist that they bear children and bring sandwiches and cold beer. I'm not sure that that's a realistic threat. I don't know why you would think that. There's simply no reason to. Now, look, I do want to say this because I want to move from misogyny into the event of the year, really, is what this is going to be. But it was the leak from the Supreme Court regarding the abortion decision. And so the reason I want to talk about that is because today is Mother's Day. And to turn on the news and see these hysterical 20-year-olds throwing a fit in front of Supreme Court Justice homes and in front of the Supreme Court, and that this is occupying all of their time now, it's very disheartening to see that on Mother's Day. You know, it's a church. And so the church didn't call up the Supreme Court and demand that they do this. you don't really have a basis to go attack the church because you're assuming that they're probably in favor of the decision. That's not a reason to go protest in front of a church. And by the way, if any of you liberals really had any guts, let's see you go protest in front of a mosque the next time they do something that you don't like, because you're very quick to go be the bully and pick on the one religion that you know is peaceful because half of your family still belongs to it. You have experience there yourself. And so you know you can protest and throw a fit and do your worst, and they're not going to do anything to you. They'll never come after you. They'll never disown you. In fact, if you ever decide to go back, they'll probably welcome you with open arms. So you're a real tough activist for protesting in front of Catholic churches. Let me tell you, that really takes some guts. So good for you. So regarding the issue of abortion, it's confusing to me why a political party would make this its most fundamental premise. This is the one thing that there's no going back on. It's done forever. We've acknowledged that this is the right of women. Somewhere in the Constitution, it's guaranteed to have abortions, and that this is the hill to die on, so to speak. I would assume that when you actually got to the core of a political philosophy to see what was most important, it might be something like free speech or individual right to sovereignty or something like this, maybe some abstract principle. But no, for the American left, it's abortion, and to have any discussion about it is simply a non-starter. So it's safe to say that what I'm about to say isn't going to land softly, no matter how nice I say it, but I did want to warn you in advance. It isn't my goal to try and aggravate or incite by making these statements, but I do want to be honest, and I am going to tell the truth. So I would say, aside from the fact that it's simply not a constitutional issue, if I were to give you 3 reasons why it's inappropriate for the Supreme Court to rule on abortion, it would sound something like this. First of all, you don't have to get pregnant. Isn't that great news? So there's no pregnancy conscription in the United States where women are forced to become pregnant, let's say at the age of 25, or there's no situation in which a woman just spontaneously becomes pregnant. And so, if that were the case biologically, if it didn't require any effort before that, you just automatically became pregnant spontaneously, then, it might be worth having a discussion about abortion for a number of reasons. But the good news is that's not the case. You don't have to get pregnant. So really, this whole issue is moot. So you can turn the video off and go back to whatever you were doing. But if you care to hear the other 2 reasons, they are, number 2, you aren't the only person who's involved in this pregnancy. And I'm not referring to the fetus. I'm talking about the man who also contributed to produce this potential life. And so the idea that because it exists in the woman's body, that just automatically, without question, gives her full dominion over it to do whatever she wants, and don't even think about the man having a say in that decision. I think that's easy to dismiss. That's just nonsense, and it doesn't have anything to do with making decisions about your body. It has to do with making decisions about the body that's inside your body that was created mutually. And so please give consideration to that much when you're contemplating this, however you come down on the issue. Men have a right to have a say in this as well. Third, it was your body and your choice to roll around naked and receive sperm. I'm sorry to be so graphic and frank about that, but let's stop pretending that you don't just have to back up a half step in order to avoid this whole thing. No one has to become pregnant. No one has to have sexual relations. And so the idea that you must maintain easy, cheap abortions because God forbid you take this much accountability when you're having your sexual escapades, that's the reason? I'm just not sure that in and of itself would be enough to illuminate a good case for keeping abortion federally protected. All right, this is packaged and sold as misogyny. Anytime the issue of abortion comes up, it's really not so much about women's right to have an abortion. I would venture to guess 98% of the women out there are never going to have an abortion. They're never going to need one. They're never going to want one. It's never going to matter. And so really, this is an issue about, again, thanks to the left, it's men versus women. They've created this. They've aggravated it now by leaking this decision. And so now we all have to suppose that if abortion is overturned, it won't simply be a moot issue that goes back to the states for people to decide. By the way, I don't know why you would want to protest people having a democratic say in whether or not abortion is made legal. I would think that you would want that, especially if you were someone on the left, perhaps a couple of decades ago. Look, people are desperate to demand that they have these constitutional rights to get abortions. Why is it so important to people that they be perpetually exempted from any consequence of irresponsible sexual behavior? Why would that be the most important hill to die on? Consequences to society. Try to imagine. You're instilling a message in people that consequences be damned. We will go to whatever length necessary to ensure that there will never be a consequence for your decisions regarding sexual activity. So this right to a permanent, consequenceless situation regarding sex, is this a principle that in the long term is going to benefit or harm society? And I don't mean just in regards to the issue of abortion, but I mean when you are instilling as a social philosophy into the minds of your citizenry that life is disposable, that this is absolutely critical that we immortalize this law forever and that no one ever question it without getting a hysterical response, because the idea that there would ever be consequences for foolish sexual escapades is just insane. Does that sound like a rational position? All right, well, I think I've talked plenty, and there was a lot to say here, and so hopefully it's landed correctly. And as always, I leave everything open in the comments, so you're welcome to let me know what you think, and all viewpoints are welcome. So I'll catch up with you on the next one.